Blessed are they who sit through 2 church services. It can sometimes be a blessing. A couple of years ago, some members of our congregation gave me a gift which is absolutely perfect for a Unitarian church history nerd, a niche audience, but a robust one if you find the right thing. And what this gift was a letter written by the minister, Reverend William Ellery Channing, to his daughter when she was a little girl. Oh, yeah, thank you, because that's how I felt. Written to his daughter when she was a little girl. Channing was one of the great progressive ministers of the early 19th century. He's the person who really helped shape and give form to Unitarianism in America as a thing, as a denomination. He preached about the goodness of the human soul. In a time when people were claiming that humans were depraved and evil just for being born, he said, no, there is something holy and decent. We're inherently good. He said that in us is a likeness to God. He said to his congregation that if you read the scriptures and your reason doesn't match, you should trust your reason and your intuition. That the presence of God also shows up in your mind. That a book can be a great source of wisdom, but that it's not always literally true. This letter came to his daughter, Mary, when she was spending time at their family farm. She's probably elementary school aged at this time. We're talking 1820s maybe. She's just sent him a drawing in the mail and a letter that it seems like that she dictated to somebody by what he says. He says this to her. My dear Mary, your letter gave me much pleasure. Can you find nobody to teach you how to write? I see a man shredding grass in the yard. Why does he do it? What did I tell you about the elephants yesterday? What will be our greatest pleasure when we reach the farm? You say that you wish to learn faster. Then you must attend more. What do I mean by attending? Have you borne any pain today without complaining? You must learn to suffer better. Your Father, who always loves you. If that is not just the most 19th century thing to say to maybe an 8-year-old girl, you must learn to suffer better. But he repeats it once. What do I mean by attending? And in the note, he underlines that word. What do I mean by attending? You must learn to suffer better. My assumption is that that's not a message you hear often from a Unitarian pulpit or in a graduation speech at high school or on television. But I think there's something to it. Because as I look around at what the world so often promises in commercials or in some faith traditions, some of what I learned in school or I had in my first jobs, the notion was that success and growth meant that I could accumulate enough wealth, power, status, or goods that I may not have to feel the full reality of a human life. I could find a neighborhood that was safe enough that I wouldn't be scared. My kids would grow up in a school that was good enough to protect them from some of the troubles of the world. If things got too hard, I could drink or eat or smoke something that would make that feeling go away, if I could afford it. That the right clothes or the right car, the right job or 401k plan or even insurance or just temporary health would somehow protect me. And then I could really get to living. I could know where happiness and truth and success and God and deep relationship came in just as long as I was protected from all the tough stuff. There's the notion that success comes from learning to externally control life until it's really domesticated and manageable and sanitized. Now me, I don't fall for the external control story as much. Where I get tripped up is believing the internal control myth. That's the one where I think that if I just get up at 5:30 every day and journal just the right amount in my journal and I meditate for just long enough and I have the right diet and the best emotional control techniques and I keep my routine for productivity going just along, I'll keep this all at bay and I'll be happy and nobody's going to get hurt, especially me. That's a very compelling myth. And it's one I fall into all the time, but the trap is still the same. The idea is that I will know real life just as long as the barricades are up and everything's where it's supposed to be. Real life does not include things I can't control. How silly of me. The Franciscan priest and writer Richard Rohr, who I know many of you are familiar with, says that far from the things that we control, the two primary paths to a transformed life come in the form of great love and great suffering. He says that there's just something you don't know about life until you have known great love or great suffering. That it might not feel like good news, and you might take it back and wish it hadn't happened, but there's something about being human that you only learn in the presence of realities you cannot control. The realities that break apart any idea that you have control over the world, or that life is tidy and domesticated and manageable. When those dualities of right and wrong, us and them, me and the world break down through love or suffering, he says, then we start to see glimpses of the God, the Christ, the mystery, all the words that people use for this ineffable thing. I think the notion that great love and great suffering may be the path to transformation is good news, even if it doesn't always sound like it. How will you measure your growth in life? Bank account, job title, resume, physical health? We all make determinations on this all the time. And we have so many people and institutions trying to convince us that one measurement tool is right. I heard one recently from a religious leader that struck me, and I think he's right. His name is Vanier. He recently died this past week. He was the leader of a community called L'Arche. It's French for the Ark. Jean Vanier is a French-Canadian philosopher, and he formed this community when he, in France, years ago in the 1960s, saw how people with intellectual disabilities were treated. Because the community around them couldn't bear to witness a different kind of human life. They were shunned and put away in a place where they were isolated and kept almost in the dark for hours and hours every day. When Jean Vanier saw this as a young man, he invited two men living in that asylum to come and live with him, and that was the first L'Arche community. Today, it's a global network of houses and almost monasteries where people living with intellectual disabilities and people without intellectual disabilities live together. They pray, they have church, they work together. The idea being that nobody is there to fix or remove the parts that appear to the outside world as broken, but to bear witness to one another. He talks about a man named Adam who lived in one of the communities who couldn't speak. He said for a person who couldn't speak, he had a tremendous impact on the room he was in. That he learned a great deal about tenderness and patience that he would have never known. And that there was a kind of love that he only knew in the midst of things and people that others had said were somehow broken. When he was asked near the end of his life how you measure your spiritual growth, he said this: you measure your growth in your capacity to be wounded. Which sounds really odd. Can you imagine someone asking, how are you doing? How's your life? I hear you're working on your job and your soul and yourself and your health. How are you? And you say, oh, it's going great. I'm growing in my capacity to be wounded. You'd get a look. Now, what he doesn't mean by that is staying in the midst of abuse or physical pain. What he doesn't mean is being a doormat or worshiping suffering, or playing the victim, or the bad theology that says God sends suffering to be redemptive for people. That's not what he means. What he means when he says that your capacity to be wounded shows your growth is that your heart has grown big enough to encompass anything that comes its way. That all the many protective barriers that we put up over and over again have come down. And suddenly the fullness of life, great love and great suffering come piercing through. If you've practiced a heart that is that open, you will encounter great love and great suffering. You will have a capacity to be wounded, but only because you have a heart that is open to experiencing the holy all around you. What Jean Vanier said is that so often in our life, what we do is we recognize the parts of us that feel weak or broken or off, and we either try to ignore them or numb it or pretend it doesn't happen or build up a wall around it, and that might feel okay, but what it does is make us disgusted at other people's weakness or frailty. And so we isolate and we move away, and we're not ever really in real relationship with somebody. And so our capacity to be wounded is our capacity to love. That sounds almost as odd to me as the advice, you must learn to suffer better. But think of almost any great mystic or teacher, poet, or saint or seeker that we draw from in this place. They've said something similar. Look at someone like the Buddha, who spent the first formative years of his life in a palace, guarded, given every pleasure he could possibly imagine. He was safe and secure and fat and happy. And yet he only found enlightenment by leaving the guarded walls of the palace and encountering things like sickness and old age and death. It was precisely through attending to those things, not running from those things, attending to those things, where he found peace and enlightenment and compassion. Think of the teacher Jesus, who seems to take the people and the realities that other people run kicking and screaming away from, and he says, I think that's where God is. We should go over there. In the poorest, sickest, most dispossessed people. In some traditional Christian theology, the idea is that God knows humanity through participating in humanity. For those of us in the room for whom his human life is more important, just imagine what it would look like to measure your success by your downward mobility, your presence with the poorest, sickest people you could find, and your capacity to know love and suffering in their fullness. No matter what the television, or your job, or your school, or your friends, or your family say, none of these wise mystics and poets have picked the protection plan for life. They have all said that our grace, our enlightenment, our peace, our wisdom, our love will come when we attend to the biggest realities in the world. If you will, bring to mind someone in your life who shows up for you no matter what. The person whose presence fills you with comfort, an ocean of grace. Who would you go and sit in a chair in their living room and say, I need help? Do you have somebody? My guess is that that person isn't someone who shies away from great love or great suffering. My guess is that person doesn't leave your gaze when you say the words, I love you. That they never said to you, oh, you're sick? Ooh. Or, that's just too sad. My guess is that the person to whom you would give your heart would sit with you in the midst of whatever was happening, unafraid to bear witness to it and show love. And I can look around the sanctuary, and because we're blessed with knowing so many people's stories, see person after person after person who has known both great love and great suffering in their life and used it to build something precious and good. This is not to say that those of you who have encountered tremendous suffering wouldn't take it back. I know you would. Wouldn't erase it, wouldn't use a time machine and cast it away and forget that it ever happened. But I've watched you attend to it. Not run away from those feelings, but attend to them and turn them into compassion and love and generosity and service for other people like magic. A graduation address or a commercial might promise that the next product you buy, the next supplement you take, the right diet, the right gym, the right degree program, or the neighborhood will finally be the thing that protects you enough to be happy. It might finally be the thing that relaxes you enough to encounter God or love. Don't buy the protection plan. No matter if you're 15 or 95. That's not where real life is. What we can promise you in this place is that life will include great love and great suffering in abundance. The skies will sometimes be bright and shining with stars, and you'll hold a newborn child in your arms and wonder at creation. You'll look into the eyes of someone who says, "I love you," and means it. The world will be filled with joy and poetry and song. And there will be storms and terrible monsters on the path. All of it together. But if you choose the path of numbing yourself or protecting yourself or walling yourself off, you will miss everything. So maybe we might learn to suffer better, or at least attend to it. To pay attention to our capacity to be wounded and ask yourself, is my heart growing big enough to take whatever life throws at it? Surround yourself with people who are willing to be with you in the midst of great love and great suffering, who do not shy away and who practice an open heart. Spoiler alert, that's a church. Pay attention to the moments when your heart is growing enough to be wounded. Don't shy away or lose the next person's gaze who stares you in the eyes and says, "I love you." The practice of an open heart will teach you things about living well and God and human life that you can learn nowhere else. May your heart be full. May you sometimes suffer well. And may you know great love. Amen.